Hello everyone! Today, we're diving into an incredibly fascinating video about a man's journey to build a wooden and bamboo house deep in a tropical forest. Finding the perfect spot, a small clearing nestled between towering rocks and next to a gently flowing stream, he began his project. With a sharp blade in hand, he carefully cleared the area, cutting away the surrounding grass and shrubs to prepare the ground for construction. Next, he ventured deep into the forest and climbed up a wild palm tree. With precise cuts, he chopped down several leafy branches. After descending, he didn't waste any time. Using his sharp blade, he meticulously stripped the leaves from each branch, working swiftly yet skillfully. With the materials ready, he gathered the stripped stems and bundled them together. After gathering the processed materials, he carried them back to the construction site, ready for the next stage of his work. After preparing the palm branches, he moved on to gathering timber for the main structure. He selected several long, sturdy trees from the forest and carefully chopped them into shorter logs of equal size. Each log was then sharpened at one end using his blade, ensuring they could be driven into the ground with ease. Once he had enough prepared logs, he began constructing the foundation of the house. Starting with the corners, he drove the sharpened ends firmly into the ground, using precise measurements to position them correctly. These logs formed the basic frame of the house, marking the boundaries of what would soon become a sturdy and functional living space. Using another short, sturdy log as a mallet, he hammered the soil around the base of each post. With each strike, he packed the earth tighter, ensuring the posts were stable and could bear the weight of the structure. Next, he took more timber and began laying horizontal beams across the lower edges of the three central posts on each side of the frame. The frame began to take shape, with two sides of the house now clearly defined. On each side, three wooden posts stood tall, with the central post slightly higher than the two outer ones. On each side of the frame, he then took two long wooden beams and positioned them from the top of the central post, sloping them down to the top of the outer post. These beams would form the shaped roof of the house. To reinforce the roof structure, he added several short cross beams between the slanted roof supports, fastening them securely to keep everything steady and in place. Using a saw, he began to carefully trim off the leftover sections of the wooden beams, cleaning up the structure and giving it a finished look. He then turned his attention to the wild palm branches once again, this time cutting them into shorter lengths with his saw. Each piece had to be the right size to fit perfectly into the floor structure. After he had gathered enough pieces, he carefully carried them back to the building site. With the materials in hand, he began to lay the palm pieces across the two horizontal beams that formed the lower edge of the frame, which he had previously secured into the ground. These palm logs would serve as the floor of the house, creating a solid base for the structure above. He arranged them evenly across the beams, making sure they fit snugly side by side. To secure the floorboards in place, he used thin strips of wood and strong cords. He carefully tied the ends of each palm log to the beams below, ensuring everything stayed tightly in position. He continued to bring bundles of wild palm logs to the house, one load at a time. With each trip, he ensured there were enough pieces to cover the roof completely. Starting from the bottom edge of the slanted roof, he carefully arranged the palm logs, one after another, working his way up towards the peak of the frame. Each log was placed with precision, ensuring they fit snugly together to form a solid. As he reached the top, the roof began to take shape, with the logs creating a natural yet sturdy covering that would shield the house from the elements. To secure the roof in place, he used thin strips of wood and strong cords, tying each log tightly to the frame below. With every knot, the roof became more stable, and it was clear that his careful attention to detail was paying off. The roof was now fully secured. Next, he moved to the edge of the stream in front of the house, carefully selecting small stones from the water. With each rock he gathered, He placed them thoughtfully in a pile near the entrance. Once he had enough, he began arranging the stones in a circular pattern, creating a small, makeshift fire pit right outside the house. He selected a flat, medium-sized rock and carefully positioned it across the top of the fire pit. With the fire pit set up, he gathered dry wood and kindling. He carefully arranged them inside the stone circle and struck a spark to start the fire. He continued to gather stones from the stream, carefully selecting each one as he worked his way along the water's edge. Once he had collected enough, he brought the stones back to the front of the house, where he began to fill in the gaps underneath the floor. With determination, he placed the stones one by one, carefully packing them into the space between the ground and the bottom edge of the floor. Sitting beneath the edge of the floor, he took his knife and began to strip the wild palm branches, carefully slicing them into thin strips to make binding cords. His skillful hands worked quickly, turning the rough branches into long, flexible strips that would be essential for securing the structure. Using a saw, he began cutting the branches into shorter, manageable lengths. The saw worked through the tough wood with ease as he measured and cut each piece to the perfect size. These pieces would serve as the building blocks for the walls. With a pile of shorter logs ready, he started on the first side wall. He placed each log vertically against the frame of the house, lining them up carefully with the existing posts. Each log was placed one after another, fitting snugly next to the other, so there were no gaps. The logs were thick and sturdy, forming a natural wall that was both functional and aesthetically pleasing. After completing one side, he moved to the other wall. The process was the same, carefully placing each log, one by one, and ensuring they fit tightly together. He took extra care with the spacing, making sure each log was straight and aligned with the rest of the structure. As he worked, the walls of the house slowly started to rise. Once both side walls were in place, he returned to the thin strips of palm he had prepared earlier. He began wrapping them around the logs, tying the logs securely to the frame and to one another. He then began preparing more wooden logs to construct the front wall of the house. With steady hands, he tied several horizontal logs between the central post and one of the outer posts, leaving a gap of about the width of his hand between each log. These horizontal logs would form the basic framework for the front wall. Next, he turned his attention to the palm logs. Using the same technique as he had for the side walls, he began to arrange the wild palm logs vertically along the frame, stacking them in a way that each log fit tightly together. The height of the wall reached up to knee level, just high enough to provide a solid barrier while leaving space above for ventilation and light. Each window frame was built carefully, with the square sections fitting perfectly into the space above the palm logs. He measured the distance from the top edge of the front wall to the peak of the roof, carefully calculating how much material he would need to fill the gap between the wall and the roof. After measuring, he took the wild palm logs and began splitting them into thin, long strips. Each strip was laid horizontally, creating a continuous surface that would complete the upper portion of the wall. The strips fit snugly together, closing the space and adding another layer of protection from the elements. After the strips were in place, he secured them with more of the thin binding cords, tying each piece tightly to the frame of the house. He then went into the forest and brought back a thick vine. With care, he began to twist and curl the vine, shaping it into a perfect circle. Once he had formed the circle, he carefully secured the ends together to keep it in place. He carefully attached the circular vine frame to the opening in the front wall, securing it tightly to the surrounding wood frame. He took the wild palm logs and cut them into smaller pieces, carefully arranging them one by one to fit the space around the doorframe. Each piece of wood was placed with precision, filling the gaps and ensuring that no space was left uncovered. As he worked, he continued to use the thin binding cords to secure the palm logs in place. The cords were tied tightly around the logs and the frame, ensuring that everything remained stable and firmly fixed. Slowly but surely, he completed all 4 sides of the doorframe, closing off the last remaining openings. Next, he set out to gather more wood, this time for the purpose of building a staircase that would lead from the stream up to the house. After choosing the right logs, he transported them one by one back to the house, where he began preparing them for the next phase of the project. He began assembling the framework for the staircase by arranging the logs in 2 sections, one leading from the stream up to the stone bank, and the other from the stone bank to the floor of the house. Each section of the staircase needed to be sturdy and well structured, so he carefully aligned the logs, ensuring they would support the weight of anyone using the stairs. To create the framework, he carved grooves along each pair of logs, creating tracks where the horizontal pieces would fit. These grooves would hold the horizontal logs securely in place. After shaping the grooves, he began placing the shorter logs across them, fitting them snugly into the grooves. Once the logs were in place, he tied them down tightly with the thin palm strips, ensuring the framework was solid and stable. The structure was coming together step by step. Next, he attached additional short logs, each about the width of his hand, along the sides of the framework. These logs extended outward from the main structure, forming the actual steps of the staircase. He made sure each piece was level, spacing them evenly to ensure a smooth climb from the stream to the house. Finally, he took the wild palm logs and laid them horizontally across the shorter logs, creating the surfaces of the steps. The palm logs added an extra layer of stability, creating sturdy and smooth steps that would be easy to walk on. He ventured deeper into the forest. His focus shifted to the large, sturdy tree trunks, where patches of vibrant green moss clung to the bark. Carefully, he used his hands to peel away the moss, gathering it in large handfuls. Once he had collected enough from the trees, he made his way toward the stones by the stream. As he arrived back at the house, he placed the basket down, ready to begin using the moss to further improve the structure. He began by cleaning off any remaining leaves and debris from the surface of the roof, making sure the area was clear and ready for the next step. With the roof now clean, he took the collected moss and started arranging it on the uppermost part of the roof, at the peak where the 2 sides met. Carefully, he placed each piece of moss along the ridge, ensuring they were aligned properly and snug against each other. The texture of the moss created a dense, natural layer that would add extra protection from rain and sun. He worked his way down the slope of the roof, arranging the moss in overlapping layers, much like tiles, ensuring that each piece fit tightly next to the other. Once he had completed one side of the roof, he turned his attention to the other. Using the same method, he began placing moss from the peak of the roof down toward the edge, ensuring both sides were covered evenly. As he worked, the roof transformed into a thick, insulated layer, ready to withstand the weather. He then ventured back into the forest, bringing with him a tall bamboo stalk and several bundles of smaller vines. The bamboo was strong and flexible, perfect for creating the door frame. He carefully split the bamboo stalk in half, using his knife to make clean, even cuts. Once the bamboo was split, he began bending the halves into a circular shape to form the outline of the doorframe. Using the smaller vines, he tied the bamboo pieces together tightly at several points, ensuring the frame would hold its shape. The bamboo was still a bit stiff, so he needed to soften it further. Next, he gathered 2 smaller bamboo poles and positioned them inside the rounded frame, crossing them in the shape of a plus sign. Using the vines, he slowly and carefully started weaving them around the bamboo frame. He wound each vine around the frame, working from the outside towards the center, ensuring that the vines were tightly wrapped and filled in every gap. The vines were flexible but strong, and as he continued wrapping them, the circular shape of the door became more defined. Once the vine-covered door was fully constructed, he carefully moved it toward the house, preparing to fit it into the doorframe. With the door in place, the entrance to the house was complete. He moved to a nearby rocky clearing, a new spot he had chosen to build yet another house. The area was surrounded by large stones, and he began by chopping down and clearing the trees that stood in the way. With each swing of the axe, the trees fell to the ground, their branches snapping and crackling as they hit the earth. He lit a small fire, watching carefully as the flames flickered to life. After starting the fire, he turned his attention to the stones scattered around the area. He carefully moved the smaller rocks to the side, creating a clean space in the middle. The area was now clear, and the ground was level enough for him to start laying the foundation for the new house. He continued moving the stones to a spot beneath the base of a small tree, which was about as tall as his head. He had already chopped off the top of the tree earlier to clear the space. After gathering enough stones, he began to carefully stack them, forming a curved, arched wall starting from the tree trunk and extending toward the large rock wall. The goal was to create a solid barrier with a gap inside just wide enough for him to pass through comfortably. With each stone, he placed them meticulously in rows, making sure the stones fit snugly together, their uneven edges interlocking naturally. The curve of the wall was meant to follow the natural shape of the terrain, creating a semicircular structure. As he continued to stack the stones, he kept a steady rhythm, aligning each layer to ensure the wall grew evenly and maintained its curved shape. Slowly, the wall began to rise, the stones forming a strong, stable structure. He was careful with each stone, balancing them in a way that the wall would remain solid and secure. The opening inside grew gradually, just enough for him to pass through. As the wall reached its desired height, the gap between the stones became more defined, and the stone structure stood taller, gradually transforming into a protective and sturdy wall. He continued placing each stone carefully, one after the other, working his way up until the stone wall reached the necessary height, fully enclosing the space around him while leaving a gap wide enough for passage inside. After the stone wall had reached the desired height, he turned his attention to the area inside the arch. He began by taking the larger stones that had been gathered earlier and using a heavy mallet to break them into smaller pieces. With each strike, the stones cracked and split into manageable chunks, which he scattered across the ground inside the structure. He carefully arranging them on the ground to cover the entire floor area. Next, he turned his attention to the entrance, where he decided to build a set of stone steps leading up from the ground to the newly created stone floor. He selected long, straight bamboo stalks, cutting and bundling them together, carrying them back to the worksite. He started by measuring the distance between the stone walls using a single piece of bamboo. With this measurement as a guide, he carefully cut the longer bamboo stalks into shorter sections, each one matching the length he had determined. These shorter bamboo pieces would be the perfect size for the task ahead. Next, he took a sharp knife and split each bamboo piece lengthwise into 2 equal halves. The knife glided smoothly along the bamboo, revealing its hollow interior. Once the bamboo was split, he used the same knife to shave away the internal nose, ensuring the inside of each piece was smooth and free of obstructions. This step required precision and care, as the bamboo needed to be both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Their smooth, polished surfaces reflected the care he put into each cut, and they would soon become an integral part of the structure he was creating. As he worked, the neatly cut and prepared bamboo pieces began to pile up, ready for the next stage of the build. He took 2 long, sturdy bamboo pieces and positioned them along the curved edges of the stone wall, one on each side, creating a base for the roof structure. He carefully laid the first layer of bamboo halves with their hollow side facing upward, aligning them neatly along the length of the base supports. These upward-facing bamboo pieces formed channels that could naturally guide rainwater down and off the roof. Next, he took additional split bamboo sections and positioned them in the opposite orientation, curved side facing downward, overlapping the edges of the upward-facing pieces. When he reached the central tree trunk that served as a support within the structure, he paused to adapt his work. Using his knife, he carefully carved shallow grooves into the surface of the tree trunk. These grooves were precisely positioned to hold the bamboo securely in place as the roof extended over this central point. Each piece was carefully adjusted to maintain the interlocking pattern, ensuring the roof remained watertight and sturdy. He moved to a spot beside the house and began digging into the soft ground using a small tool. With steady hands, he began pressing the soil into the gaps around the tree. He began by gathering an assortment of stones, selecting ones that were flat and sturdy enough to stack easily. Carefully, he arranged the stones into the gaps, ensuring each piece fit tightly with the others. He began by collecting several sturdy bamboo pieces and bringing them into the house. Then, he carefully measured the interior dimensions, using his knife to cut the bamboo into lengths that would fit snugly across the space, positioning them closely together to minimize gaps between the slats. He brought back a large, sturdy log and placed it horizontally in front of the house, parallel to the large rock that lay nearby. With the log in place, he gathered small, dry branches and twigs from the surrounding forest. He arranged them into a neat pile on the ground near the log, creating a fire pit. Once the fire began to crackle, he carefully added larger sticks to sustain the flame. Walking quietly among the trees, he scanned the ground for signs of edible plants. Soon, he spotted a cluster of young bamboo shoots emerging from the soil. Using his knife, he carefully dug around the base of one shoot, loosening the earth before gently pulling it out. He examined the shoot, ensuring it was fresh and tender. Encouraged by his find, he continued searching the area and gathered several more bamboo shoots. As he wandered deeper into the forest, he noticed a small tree laden with tiny fruit. Curious, he picked a few and tasted one, enjoying its sweet and tangy flavor. Pleased with his discovery, he gathered a handful of the fruit to take back with him. Returning to the house, he placed the bamboo shoots near the fire he had prepared earlier. He carefully arranged them over the open flames, letting the heat cook them slowly. While the shoots roasted, he rinsed the small fruits in the stream nearby, ensuring they were clean and ready to eat. Once the bamboo shoots were cooked, he removed them from the fire and peeled off the outer layers to reveal the tender, smoky interior. Sitting on the log by the fire, he enjoyed the bamboo shoots alongside the fresh fruits he had gathered. The simple, natural meal was both satisfying and nourishing after a long day of work. Alternating between bites of the bamboo and the sweet, juicy forest fruits, he enjoyed the balance of flavor smoky and earthy, sweet and refreshing. Beside him, a hollow bamboo container held clear, cool water from the nearby stream. He drank deeply, feeling the crisp freshness of the water cleanse his palate and refresh his body. After finishing his meal, he cleaned up the area. Feeling tired but content, he climbed into his house, lying down on the smooth bamboo floor.